Carolyn Miller, who is a member of the Charter Committee Board, as well as very active in the League of Women Voters, talk about whether or not we should institute an executive session and why. And then followed by Don Mooney, who's going to tell us about the city financial situation with the LLCs, limited liability corporations.
If you want to follow along, issue 12 is on page 20 of the voter guide. So here we have another of the 6 charter amendments, and by the way, all of these were put on the ballot by a vote of city council. Sometimes we have ones that have gone through a petition process, but all 6 of these were actually put on the ballot by a vote of city council. So this proposed charter amendment would require the meetings of city council and its committees to be conducted in compliance with all provisions of the Ohio Open Meetings Act. Specifying this in the charter then would allow city council to conduct executive sessions, which are private meetings, for certain limited purposes as authorized in this state law. And this Ohio law recognizes that certain situations require public bodies to confer in executive sessions in order to best serve the public interest. And I'll list just a couple of them. These are not exclusive, or these are not all of them that are listed in state law. But for instance, situations related to matters of imminent or pending litigation where they might want to confer with their lawyers, personnel matters like dealing with the city manager, security arrangements and emergency response protocols, and even certain sales of or purchases of property if premature disclosure of information might give an unfair bargaining advantage to other parties. State law lays out a detailed process for a public body to go into executive session. They can't just all of a sudden run over into council chambers and say we're in executive session. So city council could hold an executive session only after a majority roll call affirmative vote of a quorum present at a regular or special meeting. So they have to come to a meeting and then decide to go into executive session. The motion and vote to hold the executive session would have to state which one or more of the approved matters listed in state law are to be considered at the executive session. And most importantly, any formal action would have to be adopted in an open meeting of city council, so they cannot make a decision or take formal action in the executive session. Along with this then, the amendment would delete the wording that's currently in the charter that says the proceedings of council shall be public, because then it would be replaced by following the open meetings law. Prior to the year 2000, City Council did hold executive sessions for certain purposes, and David Mann remembers that quite well because he was on council then. But City Council is currently prohibited from conferring as needed in these executive sessions based on a court decision in 2000, which cited those words that I just read, the proceedings of the council shall be public. So since 2000, they have not done that. Executive sessions are permitted for other public bodies in Ohio pursuant to this Open Meetings Act of the Ohio Revised Code. So the City Charter Review Task Force, of which I was a member, recommended in its 2015 report that this charter amendment to permit City Council to hold executive sessions be submitted to the voters, and we're very pleased that it finally is going to be on the ballot for you to vote on. Just to go through, how much time do I have?
Okay, another 3 minutes.
Okay, let's go through a couple of arguments for the proposed amendment and then a few arguments, one argument against it actually. So the practice of conducting executive sessions was exercised by council itself until 2000, and it's a practice that's consistent with a number of subordinate bodies even within the city, including the Park Board and the Board of Health. And most other local governments around the state of Ohio, including Hamilton County and other municipalities, and even our school board in the area can do this. This amendment would allow City Council to conduct performance reviews of the city manager in executive session, and we all saw what a fiasco that was back in the winter, and there might be some reason to think that that could have been handled better had they been able to meet in executive session. So if these sensitive personnel discussions in particular and the reviews cannot occur in closed sessions, city councils often choose not to conduct them at all, to the detriment of the city and its efficient and effective operation. And David and Greg can correct me, but I think that city council has not actually done a review of a city manager in many, many years. And I think that's a shame, and maybe they could actually do that if this were passed. Development incentive proposals might have more oversight by city council if they could perhaps meet confidentially about some of them. And perhaps have more time to scrutinize proposals and agreements before voting on them in public session, especially when sale of city property might be involved. And arguments against the proposed amendment might be made by some of our local media that city council and its committees should continue to conduct all of the city's business in full view of the public in order to maximize transparency and accountability. That's the only one I can think of. So if you have any questions, I think we're going to wait for questions till later on this issue.
If you have a quick question on this one, okay.
Are there any questions?
I got a question.
Yes.
So, one media says that the city manager has not had a review in a very long time. Why can't council do that now publicly? Why is that a problem? Why do we have to support executive session to evaluate the city manager?
Well, maybe we could ask some of our council members. I don't really know an answer to that. I would have hoped there would have been a process, even if it had to be public, but do we want them to come up and answer that?
I mean, it's a really good question. There's nothing stopping any of us from putting together a performance plan. Or at one point we talked about hiring a company that does this nationally and having them work with us. The challenge is that it would be one or a few of us working on it. We would present it. We would not be able to have a real meaningful dialogue about it, right? Unless you consider, a council meeting, or a committee meeting, an opportunity to do that, and you can do that. It's not that you can't. It's just that it's much harder to have a real conversation with 9 people when the cameras are on and everyone's doing their thing, right? There's nothing that stops us. I will tell you there are some legal issues, like for example the settlement, right? The second settlement with the city manager. We weren't able to discuss it. And I think if we had been able to go into executive session and just talk about it, those of us who did not want to do it would have prevailed, but we couldn't do it.
I guess I would add one more piece. And right now, we can't even discuss contracts with the police and fire department without doing it publicly. And how can you have any negotiations back and forth? I was executive director of a nonprofit, and part of that evaluation is supposed to be about where you can improve and how you can improve and setting some goals. 3 months probation until you improve in some session. And this is very personal. If you're on the personal end of this, to have that publicly on the television and everybody in the world knowing everything that you've ever done wrong is really disservice to the person who's being evaluated as well. So I think our time's up on this one. Thanks for the question.
Carolyn, how do you avoid having this smoke-filled room type of things going on if you have these executive sessions? I'm just not sure what the limit of what kind of things should be discussed there.
Well, the things that they can discuss are limited according to state law, and they would have to follow that because that would be in the charter. And I think the clear thing is that decisions have to be made in public session. So they can't make a decision, they can discuss things in executive sessions, but the decision has to come out and be made in public session. Am I right, David?
Yes.
Okay.
And you have to vote
In public.
There's a public vote to decide to have an executive session.
Correct, at the front end, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the media will, if this passes, will be very, very, very attentive.